So these are some notes in the video to help you through some of this section. And this first example talks about, let's see, we got to talk about what all these variables mean. So N is the number of police officers in a town, and Y is the year. So what does this tell us? Well, this tells us that in 2005, this town needed 300 police officers. And then that's all it means. We'll get into later on, we'll start nesting these functions and have to talk about that. So now this part, we're trying to evaluate a function or evaluate a relationship based on a graph. So what this is telling me, find f or find y when x equals 2. So when x equals 2, I go up till I hit the graph and I'm seeing that y equals 1. Alright, so f of 2 equals 1. Now when we go to this next part, this is saying what's x when y equals 4. So let me go to a new ink. So what I think about this, I draw that horizontal line, y equals 4. And then I'm going to see, okay, well this graph hits that line twice. That tells me there's going to be two answers. Well, when x equals -1, that's an answer. And when x equals +2, that's an answer. So I want to include both of them. So if we think about that last example I just did, do you remember how there were two answers? Well, when a function's 1-to-1, that tells me for every x is matches with one y. In that case, that was not 1-to-1. And another way to do this is to think about it's called the horizontal line test. Okay, and if I can draw a horizontal line through the graph and have it hit more than once, it's not 1-to-1. So this is not 1-to-1. And this is one of those cubic functions, right? The parent function is x cubed. So that's not a 1-to-1 function. Variations of x cubed are often not 1-to-1. Alright, now this one, if I try to draw horizontal lines through this graph, that's only crossing once. So this yes, that is a 1-to-1 function. Now this one, remember, if you're going to think back to the vertical line test, this isn't even a function because it fails the vertical line test. So that's not even a function. Okay, so what we're going to do when we're looking at tables now is we're going to look for any time the y repeats. And actually, we got to think about if it's a function also. So, in fact, let's talk about that. If you look at this last one, do you see how when x equals 5, or the input's 5, I get two different y's? That's a situation like going on here. So this isn't even a function. Okay. So now we're going to look at these. So for the other two, I have different x's. They all have, that has different y's, and these have different x's. So both of these are functions. And this one has a repeated y. So that's a situation like this, or it could be like an x cubed. We don't know what. So these are both functions, and this is 1-to-1. This is a function, but it's not 1-to-1 because the y's repeat. So summarize that in your own words. If I look at the x's and the x's repeat, what's better be true about the y's? And if I look at the y's and the y's repeat, what does that tell me about the function, assumed is a function? Now we're evaluating a function based on a table. The function is defined in this table. So what I've got to do is what's g of 3? Well, this is kind of like what we did before, but only with the graph is what we did before. So when x is 3 or n is 3, what's q? Or what's g? I guess how are they defining this? They're telling us that q is a function based on g of n. So basically, g and q we could almost think of being what's the word I'm looking for? We could replace g with q and q with g and be the same value. So, but basically, the n is our x's and the q is our y's or g is our y. So this is saying what's y when x is 3? Well, when x is 3, y is 7. And then this is asking us to go backwards. I know that q, remember q is g of n, or y is 6. What's x? So if I take a look at this table, I see there's 2 places where y or q equals 6. So that tells me there's 2 answers when x equals 2 and when x equals 4. Is a solution for B. Now the other question, is this 1-to-1? And of course you hopefully told me that no, it's not, because the y's repeat. This is just some notes really that's in the book, and it's the equation of a circle, and what you worry about or what you think about here is there's the center of the circle, so you just replace to make the equation of the circle, you just replace that h with whatever the x-coordinate of the center is, and you replace the y-coordinate of the center there for k, and then you square the radius. So for this circle here, I've got a center of 0, 0. So I'm going to write x minus 0 squared, which, why don't I just write that as x squared? And the same thing for the y. It's going to be y minus 0 squared. So just y squared. And the radius of this circle is 1 unit. So if 1's 1 squared is 1. And this is the unit circle, is another name for this. So here's another circle that I drew. What I've got to do is write the equation for it. And well, the first thing I want to do is let's try to figure out the center. And that's looking like the center to me. And so that's telling me I've got a radius of, let's see, 1 and then 2, a radius of 3, and that kind of checks going up. And it looks to me like the center is negative 1, 1. So if I want to write the equation, remember it's x minus the x-coordinate squared plus y minus the y-coordinate of the center squared equals the radius squared. And we should clean this up as x plus 1 squared plus y minus 1 squared equals 9. Okay, you'll have to work with that forwards and backwards, but you'll get plenty of practice. So this example is asking me to solve this for p, basically. So I'm going to subtract 2n from both sides. And I'm going to divide by 6. So p equals negative 1/3 n plus 2. Now some people will write this as negative 2n over 6 and then reduce that as negative n over 3, which is okay. I also would want you to start thinking about it as writing it as a coefficient. It'll help you out in the long run that way. Now this next problem, they've got to solve this for y, and notice they say if possible. Of course they said that in the last one. So what's the problem here is if I subtract x squared, and it's also okay to write this as y squared equals negative x squared plus 1. If I take the square root, which you've got to remember, when you take a square root, we're going to write this as plus or minus. So because there's 2 possible situations, for the plus and the minus, that tells me that it's not possible to solve this as a function. And of course, if you know, that's that circle thing, which isn't a function, doesn't pass the vertical line test. So that's another way. If the y squared if the y is being squared, you won't be able to write a function. Or an even power. Same thing with if it was y cubed, or y to the 4th power. Y cubed we could do. Okay, well, this is a try it now problem. I'll let you think about it. If you were in a 65 at Oxbow, that's a D minus. If you're in a 66 at Oxbow, that's a D. A 67 is also a D. Then I think a 68 cranks it up to a D plus. All right, but what I want you to see is each of these grades corresponds to one letter grade. So it is a function. However, I've got two possible grades that'll get me a D, two possible grades that'll get me a D+, so that is not a one-to-one function. The problem was just different enough that I figured I'd walk you through it here. So, we're going to evaluate for G of 5. I'll let you think about that for a minute. Probably want to stop the video and then I'll walk you through it. So for A, I'm going to replace the M with 5. Then I'm going to follow order of operations, of course. So 5 minus 4 is 1. Square root of 1 is 1. Notice we're taking a square root, but we aren't solving like G squared isn't equal to M minus 4. So it isn't like we're taking the square root of both sides where we got to worry about plus or minus. They have already given us the positive square root. Now for the last part here, what are we replacing with 2? If you said the G of M, you're right. So 2 equals the square root of M minus 4. So now what we can do is solve this for M. So we go to isolate the M, so to remove that square root, we're going to square both sides. Then we're going to add 4 to both sides, and that tells me M equals 8, and that's the solution.